Hello and welcome to the Global Poker League and our new strategy segment where we ask our guest pro for the week to take us through a key hand from the GPL, joined once again by Mr. Jonathan Little of the Las Vegas Moneymakers. He's going to take us through a hand involving his teammate from the Las Vegas Moneymakers, Jake Cody, and Jonathan Jaffe of the San Francisco Rush. It's a hand where we see quite a big bluff by Jake Cody with the nut flush blocker. Jonathan, take us through how this hand played out.
Let's see how the Moneymakers make money. All right, so looks like an innocuous hand to start. Jake Cody makes a min raise. The blinds are 500 to 1,000. He makes it 2,000 with ace-5 offsuit on the button. And now it is on to Jonathan Jaffe, who calls with 7-5 offsuit. Some players re-raise this. No one's really folding. You can't fold too much from the big blind, otherwise your opponent can somewhat quickly blind you out, and you don't want to get blinded out in heads-up poker. So flop comes Jack 10-6, one spade. It goes check-check on the flop. This is a spot where Jake Cody's just happy to get close to showdown. He doesn't really have a reason to bet because if he bets and gets called, he's usually behind. Whereas if he checks this pot down, ace-high is going to win a decent portion of the time. So Jonathan Jaffe turns a straight draw on the turn. He pretty much has to bet. 7-high has no real showdown value, and he has a straight draw. So this is a great spot to semi-bluff. That's what it's called when you bet with a hand that's almost certainly not good at the moment. But if you bet, you can pick up the pot. So he bets, and now Jake Cody thinks for a bit before calling. I think that this is a fine spot for Jake Cody to call and see what happens. He doesn't love this spot, but notice there are a bunch of draws available. Jonathan Jaffe could easily have a hand like King Queen, Queen 9, 9-8, stuff like that. So he could very easily be bluffing with a draw, semi-bluffing like he is. All right, so the river is the 8 of spades, giving Jonathan Jaffe a straight. That's exactly what he was wanting, although he preferred not to be the 8 of spades. So Jonathan Jaffe's going to make a value bet, which is certainly in line. You're not really so concerned that your opponent has a flush heads up. Of course, he could have it, but you can easily bet here and get called by a jack or a 10, maybe an 8. So there is a lot of value to be had in betting. So he gives it some thought. Let's see how much he makes it. He takes his time. Actually, Jonathan Jaffe is known to play pretty quick, so that is worth mentioning. You can take a look at the players' time banks. You'll see Jonathan Jaffe has significantly more time bank than Jake Cody. So anyway, Jonathan Jaffe bets 2/3 pot, 6,500 into the 10,200 pot with his straight. And now Jake Cody, it looks like he has a pretty easy fold because he has ace-high. Everything got there. He shouldn't really mess around too much. But notice here, Jake Cody has the ace of spades in his hand. And imagine if Jake Cody had ace-5 of spades instead of ace of spades, 5 of clubs. What would he do in this spot? Well, he would certainly raise. So Jake Cody can use this hand as a bluff. This is called bluffing with a blocker. And in theory, Jake would like to have a different card than the 5 in his hand. I mean, the 5 blocks 7-5, meaning it's less likely for Jonathan Jaffe to have a 5 in his hand. But Jake Cody would rather have something like a 9 in his hand because Queen 9 and 9-7 are straights that make a whole lot of sense as well. So Jake Cody would prefer to have one of those cards, but I don't think the 5 matters so much. The most relevant factor here is the ace of spades. So how much would Jake Cody make it with a flush? That's what he wants to ask himself. And given that he would certainly raise with all of his nut hands, he also wants to do this with some number of bluffs. So which hands make the most sense to bluff? Well, it's the hands that can't win at showdown that also have a blocker. And in this spot, that's ace of spades with another card. So he makes it 29,500. A big raise. He doesn't quite put Jonathan Jaffe all in. I don't know if he made that size for a specific reason or if this is just the size he would make it with his nuts and his bluffs. It's probably the case. He's probably doing it with both hands. And after a while, Jonathan Jaffe, who I am terrified of trying to bluff. I don't think I've ever tried to bluff Jonathan Jaffe in my life because he always calls me. He gives it a bunch of thought. And notice, he looks pretty unhappy. And I was just pretty convinced he was going to call here. But notice here, he actually loses to Queen 9, 9-7, and all the flushes. And this is a spot where Jake Cody would almost certainly play all of those hands in this exact manner. Maybe he doesn't have 9-7 too often, but he could. And he could certainly have Queen 9, although maybe he bets Queen 9 on the flop. But the backdoor flushes are the cards that really make, or are the hands that really make a lot of sense. So Jake Cody properly realized this is a great spot to go for it. I actually watched this hand on the Global Poker League. I commentated it, and I tried this exact play online the next day when I was playing, and my opponent bet the river. I shoved all in for about 3 times his bet. He thought for forever and then folded. I had the ace-high blocker and it worked great. Let's see if this one works out for him. This may be how the moneymakers lose their money. Jonathan Jaffe's still giving it thought. He's very unhappy about this. And he makes the fold.
Thanks for the laydown.
Huge laydown there by Jonathan Jaffe, and this just shows you the power of this bluff versus players who are competent and can read hands. If Jonathan Jaffe is just the player who looks at his hand and says, well, I have a straight, I call, no problem, or I have trips, I call, or I have a set, I call, maybe that's not the type of player you want to do this against. But against someone who's smart and can hand read reasonably well, it's a pretty powerful play.
Is this a play that you'd see perhaps slightly less often in heads-up play, just because of the fact that the hand rankings, gain value? I mean, a straight in heads-up is, kind of often seen as the nuts or close to, compared with a hand that's played out multi-ways.
Well, I think it really depends on the situation, because right here, Jake Cody could have the nuts, just like he could in full ring poker, he could also have the nuts. So I don't know if it necessarily happens more often. You do play way more heads up pots in heads up, so that should actually lead you to be bluffing a little bit more often, because you have to be fighting for these pots, and you have to win them more often to justify sticking around. But I don't think the fact that it's heads up matters so much. Hand values change a little bit differently, like you're saying, the straight's just hard to get. But at the same time, Jonathan Jaffe here realizes that his straight is a bluff catcher. He loses to all of the value hands, so since he loses to all the value hands, I don't think it matters so much that it's heads up versus not heads up. It's just more so of a factor of putting your opponent on a range and going from there.
Okay, well, thanks, Jonathan. That's all for this segment on Strategy Corner here at the GPL. Join us again next time. Adios. Connect with us on social media for league updates and download our app, GPL TV, to stay on top of everything GPL.